The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. Well, today we're going to be showing a movie by Joan Shenton called The AIDS Catch. But before that, we have a really special guest on this morning, Raúl Ehrichs. And good morning, Raúl. Here, you're in Europe, right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me. And yes, I am here in south of Spain.
Wonderful. Well, it's good to have you. Right, so tell everybody who you are.
Okay, I am just another, I guess, diagnosed person of HIV positive. But my point today here was because I am vice president of Rethinking AIDS, the organization which is based in the United States. And for many years, they have been questioning the current official narrative of being HIV the cause of AIDS.
And so what's the real impact of having HIV? Because I don't think people understand.
Well, it's much bigger than people can think. So when you get this kind of diagnosis, because if you think of a very fatal diagnosis, you would think about cancer, or that was before the AIDS era. Cancer, people still coming to you and they want to be compassionate with you, and they want to show like companionship. They want to hug you. But when you say to someone you're AIDS or HIV positive, then the reaction is completely different. The reaction is the opposite. People try to, or normally what people do is they find ways to blame you for this diagnosis, or at least maintain some distance, because who knows how it could infect others. And so it's very devastating, this kind of diagnosis. People, when they get diagnosed, most of the time they are silent for a while. It was my case also. I was for some months not being able to tell anyone until I was digging more and searching, doing my own research to see what was true or what was right or wrong in all what I have been said, what all the information given to me by my doctors. And so I found this a group of scientists named Rethinking AIDS in the United States, and then I started reading their books, trying to understand their point, and it was very, I would say, life-changing, because in the one side they give you my doctor gave me the diagnosis that I have a fatal infection, and at that time it still was very like life-threatening, or death was somehow around. Now today they like to say that people don't die anymore, and then if you take your pills, but still struggling, because if you take your pills, you can have also another consequences of the treatment.
Yeah, side effects from the pills, of course, yes. So, but why are you speaking out about this? Why are you the vice president of Rethinking AIDS? What made you decide you're going to stand up and talk about it?
Yeah, so in all my research that I did, all these books, finally, I came to the United States in the 2009 to attend the conference of Rethinking AIDS, and to meet personally all these doctors, scientists, journalists, and other also diagnosed people that were meeting in this conference. And then from 2009, I started also speaking out here in Spain, so all over Spain, in all the big cities, everywhere I can. So I understood that I cannot leave this in silence. So I had to do a step forward and speak out the truth, what was not being said in the media or by your doctors. And I always had I would say, good luck in the sense of always finding audiences that they were open to listen, and they were also willing to find out and to understand other points of view, and not like in the current or the official narrative. There is a lot of censorship. There is persecution of any who thinks differently. We know a lot about that, as you can imagine. And from that time, so I started speaking out. So I do my conferences or just workshops, or I go to meetings, or we organize discussions, or sometimes we just put a video with the documentary, and then after the documentary, then we start a discussion. That is what I like to do. So I didn't want to leave this just in silent. That was my proposal.
Thank you, Val, for doing that. Val, so this Rethinking AIDS, so it's 2026, and the younger generation, I don't even think know particularly what AIDS even is. The older ones are brainwashed by the press, I would say. So how do you want people to rethink AIDS? What do you want? What's your message? Because I agree, it's an area where people are very unkind.
Yes, because in the first place, you see a lot of people suffering. So because I had my own experience, like in the beginning, not knowing what this was, and with all the difficulties to try to start reading in English, for me it was quite difficult at that time. But because I couldn't find much information in Spanish, there were a lot of books that they were not translated into other languages. So, but with all these many difficulties, finally, I got the information. And for me, the only antidote, we can say, the only antidote to fear is information. For me, that is very clear. So when I see all the people suffering, I first ask them, why do you think everything it was said to you, it's like that? Don't you have any questions? Is there something that is not fitting in your personal history? Because in mine was very clear. There were things that didn't fit, and that was the reason why I started researching for some other answers, because things were not fitting. What the doctors were telling me was not fitting with the reality of my health and how I felt. So for me, it was clear that something was wrong. But of course, I didn't know at that time what was wrong. And now I can see that the very beginning, the very base of the current paradigm that HIV causes AIDS, it is wrong. So then I could share with other people this point of view, and also share all the books, documentaries, information, and all what it was very useful for me, so I can put in the hands of other people that they are willing to also have this same path, like trying to get more answers or different answers that they are given. That is my purpose. That is my aim, my mission.
Val, what year did you get diagnosed, and how are you feeling today?
Well, I got diagnosed on 1998, so that's for quite a lot of time. I think 28 years from now, and I never took any anti-HIV treatment, and I never was ill or as ill as any other person not diagnosed with HIV, or I would say even less, because then I started also how to discover how to improve my health, how to have better diet, how to look after my health. So making all these improvements in my personal life made me a healthier person. And of course, as a healthier person, I have to say that I get ill much lesser than maybe the average person. And so I'm feeling quite well. And I never took this medication. In fact, one of the things that didn't fit when I was diagnosed is that they said that I was found HIV. So I was found infected by HIV, which is a lethal virus, and if I don't take the treatment, I would die. So that is the mantra. But in my case, they said that they were not going to give me the medication because I look very healthy. So that was one of the things that didn't fit. How can you tell me that I am infected with some virus which is lethal, and at the same time you are not going to give me the medication because somehow you say that I look very healthy and I am healthy, and so you're not going to give me the medication? That was very strange. Another thing that didn't fit at that time was in my worst moments of my life, that I was struggling with my health and I had a heart condition and all that. They ran the HIV test and it was negative. And then 3 years after, when I recovered from everything, I went out of that period of being very weak, and I was quite strong. And then it came positive. So it was like the world upside down. So that was my reasons to start the research.
Well, that must have been very frightening for you. I'm just really interested. Do you mind just telling us about, you said you changed your diet. So a lot of our viewers always very interested in how diet can help heal people. What kind of a diet are you on?
Yes, I was in the beginning, like even before I was diagnosed, I already changed my diet into a vegetarian diet. So I became vegetarianist, and then like maybe 10 years, 15 years after, then I became vegan. And I am vegan since this last maybe another 13, 14 years.
And you think that's made a massive difference in your health?
Of course, it does, because my digestion was never the same as before. They're very light digestions. I don't feel any lack of any elements. I feel quite healthy, quite good. So I'm very happy with the change. But it is not only about veganism, because you can eat vegan and also, for example, fast food. You know, nowadays you have also vegan fast food. So it's about being vegan, but also try to cook in a different way, like avoiding frying too much, like these kind of little things that makes, for example, always eat with in the first dish a big salad, in the morning only fruits, for example, these kind of things. So little things, but in the long run, it gives you huge improvement in the health. And in my case, it was like that. This is also something I try to share with the people that get in contact with me, because sometimes they get sick, because there is a difference between the people that they are diagnosed, but they take the pill somehow. In their mind, they have the idea that they are doing the right thing, so their mind is more quiet, is more relaxed. It's only they have to deal with the side effects of the medication, and which are sometimes quite huge and sometimes make people quite sick. But at least their mind is quieter. But if you are diagnosed HIV positive and for some reason you question your diagnosis, or you enter into this same path that I was also going through, then sometimes it's more complicated, because it's something you cannot share with your doctor, because then your doctor will go against you, will try to, to convince that you are killing yourself, and sometimes they are quite disgusting. Sometimes they are quite rude. Being this fear mongering and trying to frighten you that you are not doing the wrong thing. So it makes a lot of people very doubtful if they are doing the right thing or not. Sometimes when they contact me, I see that they are in this state of the mind is quite altered. So they are anxious. They have a lot of different consequences of that, because then also socially because you are not taking the medication, you don't say it. Sometimes you don't even say it, because if you don't believe it, you don't believe the HIV being the cause of AIDS. Sometimes you don't say this to your family or your friends or or at work. But on the contrary, if you take the pills, you take medication, somehow you admit that you are a victim, and then you play the role of the victim. I was just a victim of a virus. I was in the wrong place in the wrong moment, and then I got infected by the virus. It's no one's fault. It's just a virus, and I have to take my medication. And that you can share with everyone. Everyone will be nice to you because they would think that you are doing the right thing. But on the contrary, if you try to question it and you try not to take the medication, you can even have your family against you. Your friends might tell you that you are crazy, that you are losing your mind, this kind of thing. So it makes there a state of quite anxious, sometimes very lost. They don't know what to believe anymore, And so when they get in contact with me, I have to go, like one thing after another to see what is the impact that this diagnosis has to this person. And yes, and sometimes when they get ill is because they are so frightened that what the doctor will tell them, that even if they feel bad, not AIDS or HIV or something, anything, it could be anything, but they don't go to the doctor, They prefer to silence, they prefer to look for any treatment. Maybe they like to look on the internet or something, but they don't go to the doctor. And sometimes easy things that are treatable, that are curable, preventable, they go untreated because they don't go to the doctor so easy, because they know the doctor is now on their side, and the doctor is going to tell, you see, that happens because you didn't take your pill and all that. So they want to avoid that. So it's quite difficult. It's very complicated to get on with this.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure many of our viewers will actually understand what you're saying with various other conditions that we have amongst us. So, well, how can people contact you and Rethinking AIDS? How can they come to you and get help?
Okay, the Rethinking AIDS, rethinkingaids.com is the website, and there is a lot of information there. And people can contact me in my email. I also in my Instagram, by WhatsApp. I leave it in. I also have a blog where I put some of the information I can get, or I can translate or something. I share, and there people can take my phone, and they get a message first or a message through Instagram, and then I respond. We always, because I like to be, when someone contact me, I always offer like live connection, and then we can see our faces even in different parts of the world, because they call me from all Latin America. I work in the Rethinking AIDS organization. I work a bit as a bridge between the English-speaking countries and the Spanish-speaking countries. So a lot of people from Spanish-speaking countries, like the whole South America and Spain or other parts, but also in English, they have contacted me. And the first thing, we have a live video chat, and sometimes for 1 hour, 2 hours. That is the first. And it's not just something that they find. I share everything with them, all my information that I've been collected through the years, documentaries, books, leaflets, anything. I share with them, and then, of course, not all are the same. Some they are more specific, what they want, or because of the situation they are passing. So I give an extra information for them. And then after that, I always leave the channel open, like for future contacts. And many times we contact again, like after maybe they have read their books or they've seen the documentaries. I always stress them to call me back and contact me again and tell me how was it, any doubts. They have a lot of doubts because sometimes when you have more information, then more questions appears, and so we are trying to deal with it, but people start understanding that HIV, like AIDS, was not properly investigated, was not properly researched, and they very soon they had a consensus that it was HIV, but it was by all means it was a premature consensus, and none of the predictions that was that they were given on the 80s and on the 90s, none of them have come true. So on the contrary, every single aspect is something else. So for a theory, the first thing that it has to be for a theory to be useful, the first thing that they have to offer is that you can use this theory to predict something. If with a theory you cannot predict, or you fail in every prediction that you made, that means that the theory is wrong, and then you might look something else. And in the case of AIDS, they haven't done that. So unfortunately, we are still in this issue, and it was very nice, for example, to see that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. he became the Secretary of Health and Human Services recently, and he started because we read his book, The Real Anthony Fauci. And he talks a lot about AIDS, and very, very fairly. And I am glad that something seems like it's changing. So we still have to see how far does it go. But for sure, there is something that it's unbelievable in this plus 40 years since in the 80s, since this crisis, we haven't seen. On the contrary, we have seen more and more censorship, persecution, all that. So finally, we see a bit of light. So I don't know, maybe it's a better moment now. Of course, it helped a lot the COVID crisis, because the COVID crisis make the people question everything they were said about the COVID. But they understood so well that when, for example, they were talking to me, I would say, if you question that, I will tell you also about AIDS, because it's the same logic, it's the same pattern, and even the same person, because Anthony Fauci was also in the beginning of the AIDS thing and also in the COVID. So, and then when people, I was sharing and people were reading, and I say, oh, yes, you are right. So I will start questioning also AIDS. So there were like a new wave of doctors, scientists, and random people also questioning the AIDS. So that was a good point.
Well, Ehrichs, I want to say, first of all, I'm really sorry for all that you've been through. It's absolutely disgusting what you and many others have been through. But also to thank you for stepping up and educating us, educating everyone, and helping so many people, which I know you're doing. So thank you. And I know our people will contact you at Rethinking AIDS to contact you if they need to. But thank you for everything that you've done.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, because when I help people, I know I'm helping myself also, It's like I feel very reflected in, you can't imagine all the histories that have been heard in maybe these hundreds of people contacting me. And in every one of them, I could feel very easily reflected in this story. So it's like talking about myself, So for me, it's kind of therapy, when I go to this and I help people, or I try to help people, then I know I am helping myself and the rest of the world also, of course.
Yes, you're a fantastic human being. Thank you so much for all that you do. And now, everybody, we're going to go and watch the AIDS catch. So that is where we're going right now. So education is key.
medical scientists from all over the world gather in San Francisco for the 6th International AIDS Conference. It's just over 2 years since dispatchers first argued that the conventional wisdom on AIDS was misguided and that the virus HIV was not the cause of the disease at all. The programme won Britain's top award for television journalism. Tonight, Dispatches returns to the AIDS trail and goes even further, arguing that AIDS as we know it may well not even be infectious. But a word of caution. Tonight's programme does not argue that all thoughts of safe sex can now be discounted. Indeed, for high-risk groups, safe sex may well be the government's only accurate piece of advice. But until we accept that all the orthodox AIDS thinking could be wrong, we shall continue to be victims of the AIDS catch.
It was here, at Berkeley campus, University of California, that the genetic structure of a newly identified group of viruses was first discovered by Professor Peter Duesberg and his colleagues. They came to be called retroviruses and can live harmlessly in their host cell. When the retrovirus HIV was announced as the cause of AIDS, Peter Duesberg's 25 years of experience in the field convinced him that HIV couldn't destroy the immune system in the way that was being claimed. In other words, HIV could not cause AIDS.
I don't think we have found the cause of AIDS. If we had found it, we would have stopped AIDS. We would be treating people with AIDS successfully, curing them, and we would have predicted, or we could make a more accurate prediction how AIDS is spreading or behaving or who is going to be infected by it. None of this has been accomplished. That's the hallmark of a poorly grounded hypothesis, the virus AIDS hypothesis.
6 years have passed since the first claims were made about HIV, and the HIV issue remains even more in doubt. In fact, everything we currently accept about AIDS can be turned on its head. An increasing number of leading scientists are now questioning HIV as the cause of AIDS.
One of the difficulties with ascribing the virus to be the cause of AIDS is that one has not demonstrated clearly that the virus will cause AIDS in an experimental animal. And that gap in our findings at the moment produces a question.
I don't think the cause of AIDS has been found. I think in a disease as complex as AIDS, that there are likely to be multiple causes. In fact, even to call it a single disease when there are so many multiple manifestations seems to me to be an oversimplification.
I think assuming that HIV is the sole cause, the exclusive cause, is the wrong model.
This program traces evidence that contradicts HIV as the cause of AIDS. We question whether AIDS is an infectious disease at all, and tell the stories of long-term survivors of HIV and AIDS who are in perfect health, like Tom, HIV positive for 8 years, and Anna, also HIV positive 8 years. Sam, who has Kaposi's sarcoma, an AIDS disease but no trace of HIV. We talk to Michael Callan, HIV positive 8 years with AIDS symptoms in the past, but fit and well now. And Ron Wiebeck, who had HIV and an AIDS-linked brain disease, but there's no trace of either now. First of all, we must distinguish between AIDS and HIV. AIDS is a syndrome we shall argue is not infectious. And HIV, a retrovirus which is infectious, though extremely difficult to transmit, has nothing to do with AIDS and is simply an indication of high-risk behavior.
HIV does very little in a human host. It infects it with great difficulty, which is because it's very hard to pick up from somebody. And once it infects him, it spreads mildly or poorly into a few T cells and B cells, lymphocytes, and occasionally then, during that original spread, before the immune system responds to it, may cause a glandular fever. That has been reported in a few studies. Very rare, apparently. And from then on, it's neutralized by the immune system within a couple of weeks or months after the infection, and it does nothing anymore for the rest of your life.
Of the millions of T cells that form part of our immune system, HIV is only capable of infecting 1 in 500 T cells where it lies dormant. And HIV only actively infects at most 1 in 10,000 T cells. Every 2 days, the body regenerates T cells at a rate of 5%, 500 times faster than HIV can actively infect them. So HIV can't be seen to do any harm in the body and can live happily in its host cell. If HIV is so ineffectual, why then is it the accepted view that it's the cause of AIDS? We put this to Harvard molecular biologist Professor Walter Gilbert.
The general public accepts what the media tells them, and the media has blown up the virus as the cause of AIDS. And the scientific community, parts of it, have blown up the virus as the cause of AIDS because it is more convenient to have a neat explanation than to be in that situation, which we often are in science, at which the problem, the questions, still face us, and our knowledge proceeds gradually to overcome those difficulties.
I think people want to believe in HIV. People have profound feelings about HIV, and what I call them HIV fundamentalists.
Author of AIDS, the HIV Myth, one of the first books to challenge HIV as the cause of AIDS, Jad Adams has long been suspicious of the HIV hypothesis, and in particular of the way the virus was brought to public attention.
HIV was announced to be the cause of AIDS at a press conference in America in April of 1984.
Health Secretary Margaret Heckler made the announcement to a packed news conference.
The probable cause of AIDS has been found.
She then introduced the scientist who led the team, Dr. Robert Gallo.
It was rather interesting that that press conference was held before publication in the scientific papers, in scientific press, which is almost always the precursor of a discussion about whether you've genuinely got the cause, whether you've genuinely got a discovery.
In Paris, at the Pasteur Institute, where HIV was first identified, even Professor Luc Montagnier, who pioneered early HIV work, has moved away from the notion that HIV on its own can cause AIDS. Had he always believed it was sufficient to cause the disease?
At first, yes. We thought we had the best candidate for this virus to be the cause of AIDS. But after a while, even from the beginning, actually, we thought maybe for the activation of that virus in cells, we need some cofactors. So I would agree that HIV by itself, or some strains of HIV, are not sufficient to induce AIDS.
If the role of HIV is now being questioned by leading scientists, how does that affect the way we look at AIDS? What in fact is AIDS? In 1987, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, USA, revised and broadened its definition of AIDS, listing 25 diseases. So many different diseases points away from one single viral cause, argues Peter Duesberg.
AIDS is a collection or syndrome of 25 old diseases, conventional diseases. Not one of them is new. They've all been known for centuries, or at least for decades, with the provision that you have to find antibody to HIV or virus or some other traces of that virus. When they are found, then those who believe in the virus as a cause of AIDS say those 25 diseases, any one of them or combination of them, were caused by the virus. For example, if you have tuberculosis and you find HIV, they say HIV has done it. 80 years ago, 100 years ago, Robert Koch used to say it's tuberculosis bacillus that has done it.
AIDS doesn't seem to behave like an infectious disease because it remains within the high-risk groups. In the USA, 92%, and in the UK, 95% of those who get AIDS are men who are either intravenous drug users, active homosexuals, or both. No infectious agent could be that selective. So is AIDS infectious at all? Before discussing this, we should take a careful look at what we've most often been told about HIV and AIDS and clear up some existing misconceptions. Most of us have heard that if you got HIV, you would certainly get AIDS and would certainly die. It was simply a matter of when.
It is a deadly disease and there is no known cure. The virus can be passed during sexual intercourse with an infected person. Anyone can get it, man or woman.
And the latency period between infection and full-blown AIDS has been stretched from 1 year to 5 years to 10 years, and now some suggest even longer, depending on risk behavior. The goalposts are constantly being moved, and more contradictions to the viral AIDS hypothesis are emerging. For example, only a small proportion of HIV-positive people ever develop full-blown AIDS. In the USA, in any 1 year, only 1.5% of the estimated HIV positives get AIDS. This means that 98.5% don't get AIDS.
I believe I've been HIV positive since at least 1982 because I was with my lover at that time who died of AIDS in 1984. I have no symptoms whatsoever. I routinely exercise and go to work every day and do everything anyone else would do. What very often you hear on the media is enough to scare the life out of you. Of course, they say if you're just positive, you have AIDS. That one's hard to get over, the discrimination and hysteria.
Anna discovered she was HIV positive 3 years ago, but she's sure that she's had HIV since the early 80s in San Francisco, where she took drugs from the age of 14 to 21.
I was, for a while, an intravenous drug user, although it's now over 6 years since I injected any drugs at all. When I was first diagnosed, I thought, I'm going to die, this is it. And I'd been listening to everything that was being said on the television, that we were reading in the papers, and the message was, and still is very much, HIV equals AIDS equals death. Since I've known I was positive, since my diagnosis, I've had no health problems at all, really.
Kaposi's sarcoma, or KS, has always been one of the key diseases associated with AIDS, producing purple lesions on the skin and internally. Sam has KS, but is amongst a growing number of men who have Kaposi's sarcoma but no trace of HIV. At New York University Medical Center, Sam's doctor, Dr. Alvin Friedman Keene, was one of the first physicians to associate Kaposi's sarcoma with AIDS.
In the beginning of the epidemic, one of the first things that we noticed was this unusual tumor occurring in gay men. Since that time, of course, we've seen an enormous number of Kaposi's sarcoma cases in patients who were HIV-infected individuals, and more recently discovered that there were several patients who were gay men with Kaposi's sarcoma who were not HIV-infected.
Sam had wanted to be tested for HIV because he felt he was leading a high-risk lifestyle, including taking poppers, a dangerous substance called amyl nitrite that is inhaled.
I have a background of having had a lot of promiscuous sex with both men and women over a period of many years. And with all of the people coming down with AIDS, I thought that I was in a risk group, and I had every reason to think that I might have AIDS. I thought it was even probable that I did. So I was very interested in having an HIV test, and I wouldn't really have been surprised if it was positive. Fortunately, it was a negative.
Dr. Friedman Keene is convinced that his HIV-negative patients do not have AIDS, but a benign form of Kaposi's sarcoma caused by an organism other than HIV. Dr. Robert Root Bernstein has been making a special study of KS and believes that Kaposi's sarcoma of itself, without HIV, can produce an irreversible AIDS-type condition.
The existence of Kaposi's sarcoma patients who are HIV negative suggests to me that there are causes of AIDS other than HIV. In fact, I've just completed a study of Kaposi sarcoma that goes back to the very first paper ever published on the subject by Maurice Kaposi in 1872. And it shows that, in fact, there are hundreds of Kaposi sarcomic patients matching the CDC definition of AIDS for over a century. These patients are not elderly men. These are teenage boys. They are young men in their 20s and 30s. They are often described as being previously healthy.
The USA Center for Disease Control's definition of AIDS states that men under 60 with Kaposi sarcoma who have not been tested for HIV or whose tests are inconclusive have AIDS. Would Dr. Friedman Keene's patients with Kaposi sarcoma and no HIV be defined as having AIDS?
At this particular time, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and other scientists and epidemiologists around the country are reconsidering the definition of AIDS to perhaps change the definition not to include Kaposi sarcoma as a definitive diagnosis.
They once more would have to redefine AIDS. They have to move the goalposts again, which they have a lot of practice in that. They have done that almost every year. They have revised and altered the definition of AIDS. Every year they have extended the latent period. They have added diseases until 87. Now they start subtracting them again.
As the AIDS edifice begins to crumble, more anomalies emerge. UK government predictions, for example, said there would be 17,000 AIDS deaths by 1992. This has now been slashed to 5,000. That's by more than 2/3. And the number of predicted AIDS cases has been halved. Stage performer Michael Callan has had HIV and AIDS symptoms since 1983.
I'm sure that I became infected like most other gay men who have AIDS. I was very, very active in the sexual revolution of the late 70s and early 80s.
How is the state of your health in general now?
It's a paradox of AIDS. I'm healthier now than I've ever been. I mean, I have Kaposi sarcoma, I have bacterial pneumonia at least once a year, I've had herpes zoster, I have some immune complex problem, and for a while they thought I had lymphoma. But since I practice safe sex rigorously now, I no longer get the flus and the colds and the drips and the rashes that were part of being a gay man in the 70s and being sexually active, and you just didn't really notice them.
Do you think HIV is the cause of AIDS?
No, I have never believed that HIV or any other single event, single agent, could account for a disease of this complexity and diversity.
Ron Wiebeck has another extraordinary story to tell. In 1985, he was a waiter in Cape Cod when he began to lose vision, couldn't add up properly, and started falling over. He was diagnosed as having HIV and an AIDS-related viral brain disease called PML. He became gravely ill.
Well, I felt that I was going to die, and I actually asked the doctors to send me home because I wanted to die at home. Well, several weeks had passed, and then I realized that it would be worse if I died without trying. So, and also the fact that I had to try for other people who loved me. So I started fighting back.
Ron has made an excellent recovery, and both viruses have completely disappeared.
In February of 1989 and June of 1989, I was tested at the National Institute of Health, at which time they found no trace of the AIDS virus or HIV virus in my spinal fluid or my blood, along with no trace of the JC virus that causes the brain disease. Both viruses were gone.
The threat of the heterosexual spread of AIDS has succeeded in frightening the general public.
Yes, lovely.
In some young people's minds, sex now equals death. The heterosexual threat is also used to squeeze more funding for the lucrative HIV-based research projects that are underway. Professor Gordon Stewart, one of the few voices in the UK that has questioned the HIV hypothesis, has made a special study of AIDS predictions.
Well, the main prediction was that there would be a tremendous spread by heterosexual transmission. And that has not occurred. Not in America, not here, as far as I know, not anywhere. Africa is something else. And then the follow-on from that was that there would be, because of that, a global pandemic. and that has not happened either.
HIV is not behaving like a newly introduced sexually transmitted virus, which would be expected to spread like wildfire. In a recent US Armed Forces survey of over 1 million 17 to 19-year-old men and women, HIV was found very rarely indeed, a steady 0.03% over 5 years.
I seriously doubt that AIDS will become an epidemic in the heterosexual population. If I'm right that you have to have other cofactors before HIV becomes lethal, or in fact, perhaps HIV isn't even necessary. Essentially, a person who has no risk factors isn't going to get AIDS.
At the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, a campaign has been launched to raise $400 million to help fight the spread of AIDS over the next 3 years. But even the foundation's press officer admits the actual figures for heterosexual spread are not there.
Here in San Francisco, we have yet to see a massive spread of the virus into the heterosexual population. We're still looking at individuals who are injection drug users, individuals who are partners of injection drug users, namely women, as still being the individuals who are primarily getting infected in terms of the heterosexual population.
At San Francisco General Hospital, epidemiologist Dr. Andrew Moss admits that there are few hard facts on heterosexual AIDS.
We don't know how fast it's spreading heterosexually, and we won't know how fast it's spreading and what's likely to happen without some more knowledge about those areas.
How do you feel about the general predictions concerning the spread of AIDS?
I think most official predictions about the spread of AIDS have been consistently wrong in this country and in Britain and in the world. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is a lot of very bad science was done, and the other is there are political pressures to have high numbers. All administrative numbers are political, and there's usually an inflation in the upwards direction. And I think it's been hard for people to back away from their high numbers.
Inflated predictions involving the transmission of HIV and AIDS through women have had to be revised. Prostitutes were quickly focused on, but a UK survey involving 250 prostitute women over 5 years at St Mary's Hospital in London showed only 3 to be HIV positive. 2 were intravenous drug users and 1 the partner of an IV drug user. The 3 are said to be in good health. AIDS figures are not reliable, and AIDS itself is not behaving in the way it's supposed to. In fact, it isn't behaving like an infectious disease at all.
I believe that AIDS is not or cannot even be an infectious disease. See, an infectious disease, believe it or not, has certain criteria to it. How it happens, when it happens. For example, if you get infected by a bug or by a virus, within weeks or months after a contact or after that infection, you will have symptoms of a disease. In HIV and AIDS, however, we are told you get sick 10 years later, 10 years after infection. That is not how viruses or bacteria even work. They work fast or never. They are very simple mechanisms, like a little clock, that can do only one thing, go around the dial once, and that takes 24 to 48 hours with the virus. There is no way that virus could possibly slow down or wait a week or wait 10 years. That is totally absurd. The second reason why I think AIDS cannot be an infectious disease is there is no precedent, there's no chance that a microbe, particularly a virus that small, could be that picky, as selective as the cause of AIDS must be. AIDS is restricted ever since we know it to only 2 major risk groups, not the general population, namely the intravenous drug users and a small percentage of male homosexuals.
In my opinion, AIDS is not consistent with an infectious disease. And the reason why is that the risk group proportions have hardly changed at all in the last 8 years. In other words, the proportion of AIDS cases accounted for by gay men or by intravenous drug users is virtually identical now to what it was 8 years ago. This is a total contradiction with the notion of an infectious venereal disease, the prevailing viewpoint. Infectious diseases always spreads, and yet AIDS has not spread. it's remained rigidly compartmentalized.
For many scientists, it's difficult to move away from the idea that AIDS is infectious. Recognizing now that HIV can't do the whole job alone, yet not wanting to let HIV go altogether, Professor Luc Montagnier is looking for other infectious agents that might act as cofactors with HIV. He's recently proposed mycoplasmas, which are small bacteria.
Perhaps in order to have the disease, you need more than one agent. You need a second infection by mycoplasma or some kind of specific interaction between the virus and mycoplasma in order to have this burst of destruction of cells we see in AIDS patients. So there are many possibilities still. I think we are still in a at the very beginning of understanding AIDS.
At the US Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, Dr. Shai-Ching Lo has also been working on a separate mycoplasma as a possible cause or cofactor in AIDS. How does Peter Duesberg view these cofactor theories?
I think there's no chance for cofactor, an infectious cofactor, period, be it a mycoplasma or another virus or bacterium. A mycoplasma you would expect to be effective weeks or months after infection, like all other bacterial infections. And a mycoplasma would spread heterosexually and homosexually alike. It would spread randomly in the population, and AIDS doesn't.
Physician and microbiologist Dr. Joseph Sonnabend treats many AIDS patients in New York. He has long made his doubts about HIV known and believes AIDS stems from multiple factors involving risk behavior that includes infectious components.
I would believe that the infectious components are a variety of common or well-known infections, including virus infections such as cytomegalovirus infection, sexually transmitted diseases such as syphilis, and a variety of other common infections which are known to have immunosuppressive components. In the cities in which AIDS did occur, there certainly were quite extensive changes, and these were changes of a quantitative nature rather than a qualitative nature. And this simply means that the opportunities for promiscuous or anonymous sex increased enormously. As a result, the prevalence of different pathogens, different pathogenic organisms increased, so that even single exposures would be associated with the acquisition of some infection.
But Peter Duesberg maintains the infectious element is a secondary phase.
AIDS is primarily not an infectious disease, as I told you. It's primarily a result of, I suspect, of intoxication. Acquired immunodeficiency, as the word actually says in AIDS. You acquire it by consuming drugs, malnutrition that is linked to it often, or typically linked to it. Once that has happened, once you are immune deficient, then you are open to many infections that are secondary or opportunistic, as we say. That is not, therefore, an infectious disease. It is the result of that.
What specific factors can bring about the irreversible breakdown of the immune system and are versatile enough to cause other conditions included in the AIDS syndrome? Conditions that have nothing whatsoever to do with immune suppression, like lymphoma, a tumor which can be malignant, encephalitis, a brain inflammation, and Kaposi's sarcoma, which is now thought not even to be linked with HIV. In the 70s, when the gay liberation movement took off, young men flocked to New York and San Francisco, where they met up in bathhouses and discos. Writer and chronicler of the gay movement, John Lauritsen, takes up the story.
They went to discotheques or leather clubs and other places where they would take drugs, and not just a few drugs, not innocuous drugs, but they might take 6 different drugs in the course of an evening. And we don't know really the consequences of these drugs, but they would include poppers, which are nitrite inhalants, MDA, which is a designer drug, even ecstasy and Special K, which are other designer drugs. They would include ethyl chloride, a deadly substance which is inhaled. It would include also cocaine and heroin and marijuana and alcohol. And if people took a half a dozen of these things in the course of an evening, who knows what the interaction effects are? Who knows what the long-term effects of any one of them is separately?
My hypothesis is that AIDS is caused by non-infectious agents. And the non-infectious agents that I consider most likely as causes of AIDS are in part the psychoactive drugs, which are imported and consumed in ever larger quantities ever since the Vietnam War in this country and probably also in Europe.
I have always thought, and indeed since 1983 I've been saying, that drugs play a major part in the development of AIDS. Now, they do so in various ways, because there are various kinds of drugs involved, and they don't all apply to the same risk groups. There are, above all, I think, the nitrites, which we know are very toxic indeed to the cellular components of the immune system. I don't think there's any argument about that. And they can cause various other kinds of cellular damage too. I would think that this factor is so important that it could in itself produce a state of affairs which is not unlike AIDS as we now know it.
Apart from the obvious dangers of intravenous drug use, amyl and butyl nitrites, inhaled while dancing and during sex, used to come in one-dose vials called poppers, but were soon available over the counter in screw-top bottles, allowing unlimited inhaled doses.
Amyl and butyl nitrites, in the kinds of doses that they are used, particularly by gay men, have been shown in various studies to be immunosuppressive.
Do poppers combine with any other drugs that might be being taken?
Yes, poppers combine with antibiotics such as penicillin and tetracycline, both in the test tube and in living human beings and animals, to create carcinogens. These may be the cause of Kaposi sarcoma.
If intravenous drugs, poppers, and over-medication with antibiotics play such an important role in AIDS, why have they received so little attention? Why has HIV caught all the attention?
The profit motive is very, very powerful here. There are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars at stake in the HIV hypothesis, or for that matter in the case of poppers. At one time, the gross profits from poppers were $50 million a year. So therefore, most people can, at least a lot of human beings, can be bought off.
Meanwhile, the powerful HIV juggernaut thunders on, making more and more claims. Claims, for example, that HIV causes AIDS in needlestick accidents. There is not one single confirmed case of AIDS from a needlestick injury anywhere in the world. There are also claims that HIV causes AIDS and death in the babies of HIV-positive mothers, the majority of whom are intravenous drug users, through blood transfusions, which are themselves immune suppressant, and in people with haemophilia, a condition also associated with immune suppression. Heterosexually spread HIV is also blamed for the AIDS-type slim disease in Africa. But the manifestations of AIDS in Africa, high fevers, malaria, dysentery, and bacterial infections, are very different from AIDS as it's described in the West, and are consistent with pathogenic assault and malnutrition that are already endemic in some third world countries. Vested interests in HIV technology have prevented any proper controlled trials to discover whether HIV really is causing all these diseases. So there's no proof that any of these severely ill patients, grouped together under the HIV/AIDS banner, are dying of HIV infection rather than one of the 25 old diseases described as the AIDS syndrome. In the only small trial we could find in people with haemophilia, those who were HIV positive and those who were negative had exactly the same incidence of disease. Yet prejudice, discrimination, and fear continue to escalate around HIV. Children and adults with haemophilia, presumed to have been infected with HIV through injection of blood products, are particularly vulnerable to this type of discrimination. University lecturer Dick James has haemophilia. He's been HIV positive for 8 years.
I have a full-time job, I have friends, I do most of the kinds of things most people do. I have a very busy life, as a matter of fact.
Do you think HIV positive people are discriminated against?
Oh, quite certainly. Discrimination in terms of I'll be charitable, benign neglect by government or government's relative inaction concerning the epidemic, and certainly more obvious things like the increasingly famous immigration laws in the United States that prevent people from coming to our country. There are, of course, less restrictive laws on the books in many countries, and so there are some countries that I find it difficult to travel to also.
This is just one example of the gross discrimination shown towards HIV-positive people. If HIV has nothing to do with AIDS, and AIDS is not infectious, we are living through one of the biggest scientific errors in history. One of Peter Duesberg's greatest concerns is the fact that HIV-positive people with and without symptoms are being prescribed the highly toxic drug AZT, which can cause bone marrow depletion and symptoms identical to AIDS itself.
The mechanism of action of AZT is embarrassingly clear and simple. It is a terminator of DNA synthesis. DNA is the basis for all life on this planet. It's the central molecule in every living cell.
Author of a recent book describing the dangers of AZT, John Lauritsen has made a careful study of the AZT drug trials. His findings were originally published in a series of articles in the New York Native.
Well, I have examined all of the major studies which are used to claim benefits for AZT. Without exception, I would say these studies prove nothing. They have been, in one respect or another, incompetent and or dishonest. But I would maintain that there is no scientifically credible evidence whatever that AZT has benefits for anybody under any circumstance.
What do you think of the current trials looking into the long-term effects of AZT?
Yeah, well, I think they will just show, again, that AZT is toxic. If you give less, it will take longer to kill somebody with it or kill its susceptible cells with it. And if you take more, it goes faster.
So far, no one has lived longer than 3 years on AZT, and it's very difficult to know whether a patient is dying of AIDS or the toxic effects of the drug. With so many lives at stake, and not a single one saved through the HIV hypothesis, there's been astonishingly little debate about alternative causes of AIDS. Big money invested in HIV technology has had its influence. Have financial interests helped stifle the debate about AIDS?
Unfortunately, yes. Their financial interests are very obvious. Most of my colleagues I'm arguing with or debating with or trying to debate with, most of them don't want to dignify me with an answer, are millionaires. Stockholders in companies, consultants, award winners. They win awards at the same rate as Boris Becker and Ivan Lendl. Every 2 or 3 months they get an award for the virus causing AIDS. So they are orders of magnitude ahead of those who don't believe in the virus hypothesis and live on regular university salaries.
It might be difficult for scientists, but why have medical journalists been so slow to contest the received views about HIV and AIDS?
Medical journalists in particular seem to think that the public are best served by giving them unadulterated information which comes direct from the government. It's something that no other journalist does. In journalists working on economics or on transport want to give both sides of the story, and if the government says something, then the first thing they're going to do is ask a question about it.
I think it's important to question accepted wisdom, and especially in a public health case like this. So I think it's dangerous for the public not to question the conventional wisdom. But it is dangerous for some of the people who speak out most loudly and most authoritatively.
If HIV is not the cause of AIDS, the long-term implications could be disastrous. We may end up developing vaccines which will prevent HIV infections, but not prevent AIDS.
And if AIDS is not infectious, what then?
The implications would be very serious, very, very serious, in fact. Millions of lives that could have been saved won't be saved if we work on an ungrounded or poorly grounded hypothesis. AIDS prevention, which is now entirely based on preventing contacts with infected people, would take a totally different direction.
The community as a whole doesn't listen patiently to critics who adopt alternative viewpoints. Although the great lesson of history is that knowledge develops through the conflict of viewpoints. That if you have simply a consensus view, it generally stultifies, it fails to see the problems of that consensus. And it depends on the existence of critics to break up that iceberg and to permit knowledge to develop. This is, in fact, one of the underpinnings of democratic theory. It's one of the basic reasons that we believe in notions of free speech, and it's one of the great forces in terms of intellectual development.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.